Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel. In this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about Kiev. Another American media outlet writes that Trump has stopped military aid to Ukraine. A congressional aide familiar with the matter said the order appeared to suspend U.S. military funding to Ukraine as well as direct bilateral economic aid, the Washington Post reports. Ukrainians are trying to find a solution, and currently Ukraine is negotiating with the European Union to replace U.S. aid due to the suspension of funding from USAID projects. The Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine admitted that the country was not ready for such events. I'll remind you that according to Putin, if the Western countries, the United States of America, stop supporting Ukraine with weapon, munition and arms, Ukraine will be able to hold their lines for 1.2 till 2 months. So let's wait and see whether this is going to happen or not. Ukraine still have time to start negotiation process, but for these purposes, Verkhovna Rada, the Ukraine parliament, should call and should recognize Zelensky as a not legitimate president. Very interesting details are coming from France, most likely due to this critical situation. France has invited the foreign ministers of the United States, Ukraine, Germany, Poland, Britain, Italy and Spain to discuss the war in Ukraine on February 12th. Most likely on February 12th they will try to create some common opinion and to send this opinion to Ukraine with the purpose to suggest Kiev to begin the negotiation process. Now let's discuss the situation on the ground. We have lots of very interesting updates, and most likely whether the weather is getting better or just the operational pause finished. And first let's talk about the settlement of Velyka Novosilka. After the fall of the settlement, we haven't been receiving anything from this area, and today first reports occurred. According to information we have, the Russians managed to take under control the territory to the northwest of the settlement. Basically, currently the line of combat contact goes right exactly along the river of Mokre Yali. As for now, we haven't received anything that can confirm this, but if this information is correct, of course we will adjust the map in Russian favor, and this might mean that maybe the Russians are planning to cross the river of Mokre Yali and to begin offensive operation in the direction of the company stronghold that is located to the northwest of the settlement of Velyka Novosilka. Now let's discuss the situation around Andriivka fortified area, and as you can see, according to the numbers of icons and according to the types of icons, we see that the situation for the Ukrainians in this area is very difficult. As you can see, we haven't received even a single icon that shows something like combat actions, just flags from the south, from the southwest, from the northeast, from the east, and we have lots of changes on the ground. Before we start, let's compare the map between the dates. For example, this is the situation by the end of the 29th of January of 2025. The Russians just entered the settlement of Dachna from the southeast, and by the beginning of the 30th of January we see that the Russians managed to tighten the news a bit more around the Ukrainian positions in this Kurakhove pocket. First, let's talk about the settlement of Rozliv. According to different sources, both pro-Ukrainian and pro-Russian, the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to improve their positions, and basically the Russians have begun the something like encirclement operation of the settlement of Rozliv. The Russians improved their positions in the southern part to the south of Rozliv, as you can see, and the Russians improved their positions between the settlements of Rozliv, Constantinople and Ulakli. And when talking about this salient, this is very dangerous situation both for the Russians and the Ukrainians, because from Ukrainian perspective this is something like artillery pocket, and the Ukrainians just need to bomb and attack this territory to cause the Russians significant losses. But from the Russian side, if they are able to regroup very fast and carry out fast lightning attack from this salient, the Russians can enter the southern part of Constantinople, or the Russians can enter the eastern part of Rozliv. If the Russians are able to finish any of these operations, the situation for the Ukrainians is going to become not just critical, this is going to be the end of the entire situation for the Ukrainian armed forces in the area of the Kurakhove pocket. because when talking about Rozliv, the Russians enter Rozliv and they establish fire control over the main supply road, or even physical control over the main supply road that goes from the mainland towards the Andriivka fortified area. If the Russians enter Constantinople, we're gonna see the same, but probably with more huge and more difficult consequences for the armored force of Ukraine, because when talking about Rozliv, the Ukrainians will still have possibilities to evacuate their troopers in the direction of Andriivka. The Ukrainians will suffer losses during these operations, but anyway, there are going to be at least one road for evacuation. Very likely that the Russians will try to attack in both directions. Another important updates are coming from the area of Dachne. Today, according to information we have and according to pro-Ukrainian sources, the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to improve their position to the north of the settlement of Yantarne. So from this perspective, the Russians are trying to increase the pressure towards Ukraine positions in the fields and around the settlement of Dachne. As for the settlement of Dachne, different sources, pro-Russian sources, adjusted their maps, including and pro-Ukrainian as well. As you can see, according to information we have, the Russians secured completely the eastern part of the settlement of Dachne. There are still very heavy clashes. The main purpose of these Russian attacks is to pin down the Ukrainian forces and not to allow them to escape possible cauldron. Very interesting details are coming from the northeastern direction. I'll remind you that several days ago, pro-Ukrainian sources published the video that the Russians managed to enter the territory of Andriivka, and if you remember, the pro-Ukrainian sources show us a very weird map. They show that there is something like an island of resistance or island of offensive or island, I don't know, of something created by the Russians in the northeastern part, but when talking about the territories, about the gap between these positions and the mainland, we see that pro-Ukrainian sources show them as a contested area or the gray zone. But as for now, this is not important. The most important is that according to pro-Ukrainian sources, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions and to take several more buildings under their control. And now the most important part, if we try to calculate the distance between possible edge positions of the armored force of Russian Federation in the southern part of this Andriivka fortified area pocket and in the northeastern direction, the distance would be less than 5 kilometers. We don't know for sure, and we can't say that there is already a cauldron, but obviously the situation goes exactly in this direction. Most likely 1 or 2 weeks and the Ukrainians would be forced to fall back from this territory as well. And by losing this fortified area, Andriivka fortified area, the Ukrainians will be at risk to lose much more territories, because obviously the Andriivka flower is going to bloom. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Dnipro direction. As you can see, we have adjusted the map significantly. We have colored the settlement of Novoandriivka completely in Russian favor, and we made, as you can see, these territories used to be considered as a contested area, and now we have no doubts that the village was captured by the Russians. We came to these conclusions, as well as most of the mappers, based both on the different mapper updates of different sources and based on the video that was published by the Ukrainian side. In this video that was published the previous 12 hours, we can see how the Ukrainians using infantry fighting vehicles Bradley were counterattacking the Russian positions along the tree line to the west of the settlement of Novoandriivka. So most likely the Ukrainians restore control over this tree line. We don't know for sure, but for example, the pro-Ukrainian sources show that the tree line is under complete Russian control, but obviously everything behind this tree line was already captured by the Russians. So based on this video, based on these map updates, we have adjusted the map in the Russian favor, and currently the Russians are about to start and they're ready to begin offensive operation further in the western direction, and most likely the battle for the settlement of Sribne is going to start in the very near future. And by entering the village of Sribne, the Russians will enter the final phase of the battle for this dense network of small settlements. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Pokrovsk direction. During the previous 24 hours, these Russian sources reported about additional progress on the ground. According to different pro-Russian resources, as a result of offensive, the Russians took under control several Ukrainian positions along the railways, but without any proofs, as I understand. And most important, I'll remind you that that's the 425th Separate Battalion, published during the previous 5 days at least 2 videos of how the Ukrainians were counterattacking in the direction of the southeastern part of Kotlina. So as for now, we have some doubts about this report about additional progress on the ground from the Russian side. The Ukrainians that are still on the territory of Pokrovsk continue publishing lots of videos of the situation in this area. As you can see, most of the buildings were damaged, but most of the buildings, the Ukrainians, if they decide to return back, are still able to use. So this is most likely one of the purposes and one of the main goals of the armed force of Russian Federation, to do everything they can but to save the city of Pokrovsk for further usage. Now let's move further. In this area of the city of Donetsk, there are still very heavy clashes. The Ukrainians continue their counterattacks in the northern part in the vicinity of the mine of Donetsk, trying not to allow the Russians to take this territory under complete control. We see that despite the fact that the Russians managed to take the city of Donetsk almost for 99%, they still haven't managed to take the last percent in this area. Now let's discuss the situation in the city of Chasiv Yar. According to information we have, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to secure the forest between the micro-district of and the last micro districts of the city of Chasiv Yar in the southern part. So these are the changes on the ground according to pro-Ukrainian sources. As for the citadel, there are very heavy clashes in this area. The Russians most likely are about to begin their final assault operation. In this video we can see the artillery preparation. The Russians were bombing and attacking the positions of the armored forces of Ukraine in the central part with the use of the flamethrower systems. Maybe today we're going to receive additional changes on the ground. Also, the Ukrainian sources published lots of photos of the current situation in the area. As you can see, the city of Chasiv Yar wasn't reduced to ruins, as for example the eastern part of the city of Chasiv Yar or the city of Volchansk. There are lots of buildings that most likely the Russians will be able to use in the future, but if we compare, most likely the city of Chasiv Yar was reduced, let's say, by 50% to ruins. Not the entire, anyway, the damage is very huge. The Russian sources also published the video from the micro-district of Pivnichny. According to the Russian sources, this micro-district this previous day was secured by the Russians completely. According to the geolocations that we received in the past, this territory was colored in Russian favor a long time ago. Another very interesting video we can find between the city of Bakhmut and Ivanovsky. In this video we can see a new version of Russian turtle tank. As you can see, the turtle tank was armored significantly, and in this video we can see how the Russians were evacuating the abandoned Ukrainian EPR infantry fighting vehicle. So something new. As we can see, the Russians are continuing improving their technologies and their vehicles with the purpose to stay strong against the Ukrainian drones. And now we are moving to the most important area, to the settlement of Verkhnykamensk. Today the Russian sources published the video of how they were attacking the Ukrainian positions in the central part of the settlement. In this video we can see several tanks, infantry fighting vehicles that were moving towards the settlement of Verkhnykamensk. The Ukrainians, as you can see, were after withdrawing the Russians. As you can see, the Russians were using turtle tank, and as a result of this fast lightning attack and most likely unexpected attack, the Russians managed to enter the central part of Verkhnykamensk, and the Russians began securing operation. Based on this video we have adjusted the map. Once again, the Russians were attacking something like this, and based on this video we came to the conclusion that everything in the southeastern direction from this point was already captured by the Russians. This is very important offensive operation. By this attack the Russians managed to cut the company stronghold in the most eastern part of the settlement, and basically the Ukrainians that are currently located in this area were caught in cauldron. Now the Russians need just to hold their lines as long as possible, and if they're able to hold their lines and to repel possible Ukrainian counterattacks from the west. And meanwhile, if the Russians are able to carry out several successful operations in the direction of this company stronghold and the eastern Verkhnykamensk, then the Russians will take everything here, and this is going to be the beginning of the battle for the city of Siversk, because from these positions the Russians will continue advancing further in the western direction, and something big might happen here in the early or late spring campaign. Now, as for the Kupinsk direction, during the previous 24 hours, we haven't received anything special. And as for the Sudzha direction, during the previous 24 hours, according to different sources, the Russians managed to improve their positions along the border and to take under control the border lines and the strongholds along the border between Ukraine and the Russian Federation. As for now, without any proofs, but anyway, this is very important. From this pocket, the Russians can advance deep inside the territory of Ukraine towards the road NO7. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.